The morning Elena knocked on my door, I had already mentally prepared myself for disappointment. 3 previous companions had lasted less than a month each, too clingy, too distant, or too obvious in their attempts to be something more than what I'd hired them for. I needed structure, not drama. Mr. Harrison. Her voice carried a slight accent I couldn't quite place. When I opened the door, I found myself looking at a woman in her late 20s with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes the color of autumn leaves. She wore a simple navy dress and carried herself with quiet confidence. "Just call me Nathan," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "And you must be Elena." She nodded, taking in my apartment with an appraising glance. "The agency told me you work from home and need someone to help with daily management." Her tone was professional, matter of fact. "I've reviewed your requirements. Meal preparation, errand running, household organization. I can start immediately." Over the next few days, Elena settled into a routine that was almost military in its precision. She arrived at 7 each morning, prepared breakfast without being asked about my preferences, somehow knowing I liked my coffee black and my eggs over easy. She organized my chaotic home office, transforming months of scattered papers into a filing system that actually made sense. What struck me most was her silence. Not uncomfortable silence, but the focused quiet of someone completely absorbed in their work. She moved through my space like she'd been there for years, anticipating needs I didn't even know I had. "You don't have to eat alone in the kitchen," I told her one evening, finding her with a book and a simple dinner of soup and bread. "I prefer it," she replied without looking up. "Boundaries are important." But I caught her glancing toward the living room where I sat with my laptop, and something in that glance made me wonder if her preference for boundaries was as firm as she claimed. By the end of the first week, I had to admit she was exactly what I'd asked for: efficient, unobtrusive, professional. So why did I find myself staying up later, hoping she might linger after finishing her tasks? The first surprise was subtle, a cup of tea appearing beside my laptop during a particularly stressful afternoon call with a client. Earl Grey with honey, prepared exactly how I liked it, though I'd never told her my preference. When I looked up to thank her, she was already gone. Then came the notes. Small, handwritten reminders placed strategically around the apartment: doctor's appointment tomorrow at 2 p.m., tucked into my coffee mug, remember to call your sister, paperclip to my laptop. Her handwriting was elegant, flowing, the kind you rarely saw anymore. "How did you know about my sister?" I asked one morning, finding her in the kitchen preparing what looked like enough breakfast for 2. Elena paused, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "You mentioned her last Tuesday when you were on the phone. You sounded worried." She set a plate in front of me, eggs Benedict, perfectly prepared. "I made extra. I hope you don't mind." Mind? I couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for me with such attention to detail. The hollandaise was flawless, the eggs exactly the right consistency. But more than that, she'd remembered a throwaway comment from days ago and cared enough to remind me. As weeks passed, I began noticing more. How she always had my favorite jazz playing softly when I came downstairs in the morning. How she'd started buying the specific brand of pen I preferred without being asked. How she somehow sensed my moods, appearing with soup when I felt a cold coming on, giving me extra space on days when work was particularly frustrating. "You're very observant," I commented one evening, catching her adjusting the thermostat just as I'd started to feel warm. She turned, and for a moment our eyes met. "I pay attention to what matters," she said quietly. Then, as if realizing the implications of her words, she quickly added, "To my work, I mean." But the way she looked at me suggested her attention encompassed far more than professional duties. And the way my pulse quickened when she was near told me I was beginning to care about more than just efficient household management. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday evening. I'd been fighting with a client proposal for hours, growing more frustrated by the minute. Without a word, Elena appeared with a glass of wine and settled into the chair across from me. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward my laptop. For the next hour, she helped me restructure the entire proposal, offering insights I hadn't considered. Her mind was sharp, analytical, nothing like the simple household management I'd thought I was hiring. When we finished, the proposal was stronger than anything I could have created alone. "Where did you learn about marketing strategy?" I asked. A shadow crossed her face. "Previous life," she said simply, closing the laptop. "I should go. It's getting late." But she didn't move, and neither did I. We sat in the lamplight, rain drumming against the windows, and I realized that somewhere between the perfect breakfasts and thoughtful notes, my carefully maintained professional distance had completely disappeared. "Stay," I said before I could stop myself. "I mean, for dinner. I could order something, and we could talk." Elena hesitated, her professional mask wavering. "Nathan, I don't think. Please." The word came out more vulnerable than I'd intended. "I'm tired of eating alone." Something shifted in her expression. She nodded slowly. "I'll cook. There's salmon in the refrigerator." That dinner changed everything. Over perfectly prepared salmon and a bottle of wine I didn't know I owned, Elena began to unfold. She told me about growing up in Barcelona, about her university degree in international business, about dreams that had been interrupted by circumstances she didn't quite explain. "Why companion work?" I asked, genuinely curious. She was quiet for a long moment, tracing patterns on the tablecloth with her finger. "Sometimes we need to step back from who we were to figure out who we want to become." I understood that more than she knew. My own retreat into solitary work-from-home life had been an escape too, from expectations, from disappointments, from the exhausting effort of pretending to be someone I wasn't. As the evening wore on, our conversation grew more intimate. She laughed at my stories about disastrous client meetings, and I found myself captivated by the way her eyes lit up when she talked about places she wanted to travel. When she reached across the table to brush wine from my chin, her touch lingered longer than necessary. "I should go," she whispered, but she didn't pull her hand away. "Should and want are different things," I said, covering her hand with mine. "Nathan." Her voice was breathless. "Tell me you don't feel this too," I challenged softly. "Tell me I'm imagining the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching." Instead of answering, she leaned forward and kissed me. It was soft at first, tentative, then deeper as I responded. Her lips tasted like wine and possibility. When we broke apart, both of us were breathing hard. "This complicates things," she murmured against my mouth. "Maybe complications aren't always bad," I replied, standing and offering her my hand. She took it without hesitation, and I led her upstairs. In my bedroom, she was different, not the composed professional but a woman letting down her guard. She undressed slowly, her eyes never leaving mine, and when I traced the curve of her shoulder with my fingertips, she shivered. "Are you sure?" I asked, needing her consent more than air. "I've never been more sure of anything," she breathed, pulling me down to her. We made love with an intensity that surprised us both. Every touch felt like a revelation, every kiss a confession we'd been too afraid to voice. Afterward, as she lay curled against my chest, I realized that what I'd thought was a simple arrangement had become the most complicated and wonderful thing in my life. For 2 blissful weeks, we existed in a bubble of newfound intimacy. Elena still maintained her professional duties during the day, but evenings belonged to us. She'd cook while I worked, and afterward, we'd share wine and conversation that stretched late into the night. On weekends, she stayed over, and I discovered the luxury of waking up next to someone who understood both my need for solitude and my desire for connection. The bubble burst on a Tuesday morning when my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Elena answered it while I was in the shower, and when I came downstairs, I found her pale-faced, speaking in rapid Spanish to a well-dressed man I didn't recognize. "Elena?" I called, and both of them turned. The man's expression was calculating, assessing. "This is Carlos," Elena said stiffly. "My former business partner." Carlos smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Actually, I'm her husband. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at Elena, waiting for her to deny it, to explain. Instead, she closed her eyes in defeat. She said quietly. We're divorced. Paperwork, Carlos waved dismissively. Elena, you need to come home. The business needs you. We need you. I can't, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I stood there feeling like an intruder in my own home, watching this drama unfold between two people who clearly shared a complicated history I knew nothing about. What business? I asked. Elena's cheeks flushed. Import-export. We built it together, but she ran away when things got difficult, Carlos finished. Left me to handle the bankruptcy proceedings alone. That's not, Elena started, then stopped. Carlos, please leave. Nathan and I need to talk. After Carlos left, the silence between us was deafening. Elena sat on my couch looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Were you going to tell me? I asked. About the divorce? Eventually. About Carlos. I hoped I wouldn't have to. What happened to your business? She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. We made some bad investments. When the company started failing, Carlos wanted to cut corners, things that weren't exactly legal. I couldn't be part of that, so I left. And became a companion because I lost everything, she said simply. My business, my marriage, my home. I needed work that didn't require references from my previous life. I wanted to comfort her, but doubt had already taken root. How much of what we'd shared was real? Had I fallen for another carefully crafted professional performance? I need some air, I said, grabbing my jacket. We'll talk when I get back. But when I returned 2 hours later, Elena was gone. The only trace of her was a note on the kitchen counter. I'm sorry I couldn't be who you thought I was. 3 days passed in miserable silence. My apartment felt hollow without Elena's presence. I found myself looking for her notes, listening for her footsteps, reaching for the phone to call her before remembering I didn't even have her number. All contact had gone through the agency. On the 4th day, I called the agency. They told me Elena had terminated her contract and left no forwarding information. Dead end. I spent the next week doing my own detective work, driven by something I couldn't quite name. Public records, business filings, anything that might tell me Elena's story. What I found painted a picture of a woman who'd built something impressive from nothing, only to watch it crumble when faced with an impossible choice between success and integrity. The newspaper article about her company's bankruptcy was particularly revealing. Former CEO Elena Vasquez declined to comment on allegations of import violations, but sources close to the investigation suggest she was the whistleblower who brought the illegal practices to authorities' attention. She hadn't run away from difficulty, she'd made the hardest choice possible and paid the price for it. I found her at a small cafe in the Arts District, working on a laptop with papers spread around her table. She looked up when I approached, surprise and wariness flickering across her face. May I sit? I asked. She nodded reluctantly. How did you find me? Persistence and public records. Elena, I know about the whistleblowing. About what really happened with your business. Her shoulders sagged. Then you know why I couldn't tell you. Who wants to get involved with someone whose life is a complete mess? Someone who's falling in love with her, I said simply. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Nathan, you don't understand. I have nothing to offer you. No career, no savings, no. You have yourself, I interrupted. The woman who pays attention to what matters. Who makes perfect hollandaise and remembers to call my sister. Who chose doing right over doing well, even when it cost her everything. I deceived you. You protected yourself. There's a difference. I reached across the table and took her hand. Elena, I spent years avoiding real connection because it seemed too complicated, too risky. Then you walked into my life and showed me that the right complications are worth it. She was quiet for a long moment, studying our joined hands. Carlos wants me to come back to Barcelona. He says he's changed, that we could start over. My heart clenched, but I forced myself to ask, is that what you want? I want to wake up every morning knowing the person beside me sees me, really sees me, and chooses to stay anyway. She looked up, her autumn eyes bright with unshed tears. I want to build something honest with someone who understands that trust is earned, not assumed. Then come home with me, I said. Not as my companion, as my partner. We'll figure out the rest as we go. This time, when she kissed me, it tasted like new beginnings and promises kept. We walked back to my apartment together, hands intertwined, ready to write the next chapter of a story that had begun with professional boundaries and blossomed into something neither of us had dared to hope for. That night, as Elena fell asleep in my arms, I realized that the best arrangements are the ones that grow beyond their original terms. What we'd found wasn't what either of us had planned, but it was exactly what we needed, a connection built on honesty, tested by truth, and strengthened by the choice to stay when staying became difficult. 6 months later, Elena's new consulting business was thriving, built on the reputation for integrity that had once cost her everything. And I had learned that the most profound intimacy comes not from perfect people, but from flawed ones willing to be vulnerable with each other. Love, it turned out, wasn't about finding someone with no complications. It was about finding someone whose complications fit perfectly with your own.